We're gonna get to this week in trading history, and I got a good one for you.
Oh, this is where you excel, Patrick. This is it.
Yeah, I agree, and I dug up. I
I
agree.
agree.
I'm good at this. No, but third beer in. All right, so John Maynard Keynes. He was born on June 5th in 1883 in Cambridgeshire, England. And obviously, this guy he's a legend, right? And so
A
he's a
legend.
legend. Obviously, the first thing that always comes to mind when you think Keynes is his famous book, "The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money." Right? That's the.
Yeah, that's right. That's what everybody thinks about, Patrick. That's the first thing that they
Well, I
think
mean,
about.
that's his most famous book, is it not? And
Yes, it
anyway,
is.
so he is the father of modern economics. I mean, his entire school of economics named after him, right? And correct me if I'm wrong in describing Keynesian economics, but it's generally actually I'm going to just read it. It says generally argue that the aggregate demand is volatile and unstable, and the market economy often experiences inefficient macroeconomic outcomes in the form of economic recessions when there's demand is low and inflation, which is demand is high, and that these can be mitigated by economic policies, right?
Right.
And so this idea that monetary policy actions by central banks and fiscal policies, one of your favorites, and the actions by the governments, which can stabilize the output over the business cycle. And Keynesian economics generally advocate a managed market economy, right? Which is this idea that the government steps in when there's a recession, spends when the demand is low, and subsequently cuts back when there's a healthy economy. That's a fair way of sizing it up? Is there something you'd want to add to that?
You got it.
Right.
You know, and one of the things I'll just kind of highlight is the fact that Milton Friedman said during the Nixon, administration, he said we're all Keynesians now,
Well,
and that was because and I think I think a lot of people believe that his policies have been perverted,
yeah.
and we'll see. We'll go into
Well, I
that a
mean, they're
little bit, but
perverted because
but
our financial system is a little bit perverted, right? I mean, it's just a function of no, but it's a function of where we are in this cycle, right? Like, I mean, with such a massive debt overhang in the whole system, it can't run the way I think. Like, I think if Keynes was alive today and he tried to interpret what was happening in the financial markets, I think he would draw himself different conclusions than his general theory.
well, I think that don't forget he would have thought that you paid down the deficit during or debt during
But
kind of
again, that
economic
was in
upswings, which
that.
is basically never
Yeah,
happened.
but okay, all right. And so,
Okay. Anyways, keep
no, no,
going.
no, no,
Sorry,
no,
I don't
no,
mean
no.
to interrupt your history
This is good.
lesson
This is
here.
good. I like it. It's but the point is he came up with the general theory. There's an entire school of Keynesian economics. And but I wanted to highlight a few more things in his life, right? So we're talking about the man, not the theory, right? Where we're talking, he was the one. He was born in this week in history, and we want to sort of talk about what he did. And so one of the interesting things was he wrote a piece called "The Economic Consequences of the Peace." And I know Grant Williams kind of took that theme and he did a little video on gold and stuff like that on that theory. But when he wrote this, it was really about the Treaty of Versailles, right? And so after World War One and Germany having surrendered, period, then the French, English, Americans got together and they put together this treaty. And Keynes argued against the Treaty of Versailles. He argued for much more generous peace. Like the French wanted things to the Germans to pay heavily for having caused this war, and the reparations were very tough. And Keynes took an approach that's saying that's not we have to be more generous about the peace, and that for stability around the world, that the Treaty of Versailles generally was overkill, and in
Right.
many ways the Treaty of Versailles could be blamed for hyperinflation in Germany, the rise of the Nazi Party, and arguably was a massive contributor into ultimately the beginning of World War II. Right, and so
Right.
he was a skeptic right from the beginning. And if people listened to Keynes back then, maybe World War II may not have happened. I don't know. It's a
There you go.
speculation. I mean, I'm only time traveling now, but but it is interesting. But that's not the most interesting part about Keynes for me. You want to know what it is?
What is it, Patrick?
All
Tell
right.
us.
To me, it was his role in Bretton Woods. So, everyone here, like, especially when you're in the gold bug circuit, and I don't mean gold bug being derogatory, but like there's the other beer. Oh, there you go. What is that,
Yeah.
number 4 for
No,
you?
so I don't know, but you don't mean to be gold bug being derogatory, but yet you do.
No, I don't. I'm a
Come
I'm a
on.
closet gold bug, so I'm not going to, shit on my own kind. Uh, but anyway, the point is that Bretton Woods, uh, he was instrumental in its origins, right? So the Bretton Woods Conference that occurred was the birth of our modern monetary system. It happened in 1944. To think about it, Bretton Woods was going on when Hitler was still alive, right? The atom bomb
Right.
wasn't dropped yet. But at the time, the Allies had a pretty good idea that they were going to win, right? Like
Right.
everyone knew that it was just a matter of time before Germany and Japan fell. And so they were already getting together to talk about what the new world order was called. And the new world order seems like it's scary, but they literally called it the new world order back then. Like what is it
Right.
going to literally look like in the post World War II period? And Keynes played an incredibly important part in what is today, in what back then was installing of the U.S. dollar as the world reserve currency, right? To be held by all central banks, collateralized against gold reserves. Like all of this originated from Bretton Woods, and Keynes was there, and it was his brainchild behind a lot of this, in terms of where we are even today. And everything from the dollar being the world reserve currency, there's a great book summarizing this. The book's called The Battle of Bretton Woods. It's a must read.
Right. So, Patrick, well, I got to stop you here. You call something a must read, but we all know you can't read.
All right, so it's a must. You have to download the audio book and must listen to this audio book.
It's a must
It's a
listen.
must listen. Well, thanks for shitting on me. All right, I appreciate it, Ken.
That's
So
right.
it's a must.
When we go look at Harry, by the way, you know what? Although Keynes was instrumental, do you know who he was up
Yeah,
against?
no, I'm
in
getting
terms
to that.
of
I'm going to
he
talk
was
about White.
okay. I'm sorry, I didn't mean.
We're going to talk about Harry Dexter White and Morgenthau and all of these guys right now. So back then, it was, while they tried to make it paint it as an international conference and all countries were welcome. Let's call a spade a spade. It was an Anglo-American consortium of basically the former British Empire negotiating with the new up and coming world superpower of America, where the vast majority of the world's gold reserves were being held, and it was about them negotiating the post-war financial system, global financial economic system, right?
Right.
And so Keynes, being British, obviously was going there negotiating on behalf of a hollowed and bankrupt British Empire against this new global superpower America, where, I mean, I don't know whether I'm pulling stats out of my ass, but I think like 85% of the world's gold was on U.S. soil at the time, they were the one that were supplying the world with all of the goods through the war, and they've become this huge power, and so they're planning out this new world order, right? And so Keynes and company in England are going up against Harry Morgenthau which was the Secretary of the Treasury, and his senior U.S. Treasury Department official, Harry Dexter White, the one you were just referencing,
Right.
right? And so, Keynes, though, was the brainchild behind a lot of this. He was the one who came up with and pushed for the creation of the IMF, International Monetary Fund, that's around today, the creation of the World
Right.
Bank, which is around today.
Yep.
And at the time, he was pushing for the creation of the Bancor, which was to be world money for the settlement of international trade. Right. And
Ah.
so the idea of making world money, and whether we look at SDRs today and other things like this as world money, the idea was that there was going to be this Bancor that was going to exist. But he also had an agenda to protect British imperial interests, right? Because prior to all of this, the British Empire, I think, controlled 25% of the land mass of the world, right? And they had preferential trade agreements with all of the Commonwealth, and they were trying to protect those interests. And of course, the Americans wanted that completely to be dismantled, because there's no benefit to them for the British having that imperial interest. So Keynes was coming in there with all of these ideas. But what's amazing was the deception that occurred at Bretton Woods. So the conniving Harry Dexter White, if I may call him that.
You're going to get us in trouble from all the Americans, and although the British
listen, this is all
listeners will be really
documented
happy.
from after 50 years.
Conniving.
Maybe that's a strong word, but anyway, the point is that Harry Dexter White intentionally asked Keynes to take charge of the part of the conference that was in charge of structuring the World Bank. So that way he gets him out of the negotiation where the Americans were trying to sort out how to make the U.S. dollar the world reserve currency.
Crazy like a fox, that Harry.
Crazy like a fox. And in the end, they deceived Keynes. So Harry Dexter White negotiated out that basically the gold was the world reserve currency. Gold was the core to it, but it would be U.S. dollars that were backed by gold, and the rest of the world would use U.S. dollars as the reserve currency, which was backed by gold. So he added that extra step where all the global central banks of the world would own U.S. dollars, which were backed by gold, which in their mind was the equivalent of gold.
Right.
Except in 1970, when you pull the gold as the backing of the dollar, suddenly you have the U.S. dollar as the world reserve currency. Anyway, you get into Triffin and stuff and all that other funky stuff that happens with all, what we talk about on all our podcasts all the time as to the consequences of the dollar being the world reserve currency. But that all originated there. But more importantly, it was Harry Dexter White that deceived Keynes, because Keynes didn't find out that that was the language put in until like a week after the conference ended. He would have never agreed to it, or he would have made a huge ruckus if he found out. And in the end, because they put him in charge of something else, they completely pulled a fast one on him. And in the end, that's how the U.S. dollar became the world reserve currency. But anyway, it is about Keynes this week in trading history. Hold on, but and
wait, before you wrap up here, there he is.
Yeah.
I have my little Keynes that I want to share with you, because I've been researching him as well. I'm not quite as knowledgeable about the specifics about the Bretton Woods as you are, but I did want to kind of highlight that Keynes was really actually, although he was from the early 1900s, he was more geared towards the current environment in terms of being advanced on social matters than you would have ever
guessed.
He's
an MMT guy before he even knew it.
No, he's not an MMT guy. But listen, he would have been at the head of the Me Too movement, because listen to this. Keynes was a pioneer of women's rights to control their own bodies and gender equality.
Okay.
The restricted availability of contraceptives, the lack of sex education, marriage and divorce laws that treated women as subordinates, criminal sanctions against homosexuality, job discrimination against women, unequal pay. In all these matters, he said, the existing state of law and orthodoxy is still medieval, altogether out of touch with civilized opinion and civilized practices.
He's a smart man.
Yeah.
He,
And here's something also you didn't know. Did you know he was bisexual?
no.
There you go. These are the kind of things you find out on the Market Huddle that you don't find anywhere else. That's not on CNBC.
You can't find that on Wikipedia at all.
Well, I don't know on Wikipedia, but And as Lena told me the other day, who isn't bisexual these days? That's what that's what Lena, our audio engineer, told me. So anyways, so he was much more suited towards today's environment than he was than the early 1900s.
Well, there you go. Anyway,
We'll leave it there.
Keynes was born in 1883, and he reshaped the world that we know today. And, well, that's This Week in Trading History. So let's move on.